Hey guys, this is Nevir and welcome to this video on how to play the turn once you get caught. So in the last two videos we saw which sizing you should pick on many different textures, and we also saw that you have to increase your c-betting frequency because people don't check raise enough and they don't float enough. But now we still have one problem, is that when we get caught we don't really know what to do on the turn, and it feels like we have to give up too many hands and we're gonna get exploited. But I'm gonna explain you everything you need to know. Since villain doesn't check raise enough and we're gonna range c-bet the flop, our equity decreases a lot because he already folded all his trash hands while we still have 100% of our range. So think about it. Let's say the flop is 10-6 deuce. You're gonna c-bet all your king queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, all your broadways. Turn's gonna be a 7, an 8, a 5, and you just have nothing. And your opponent already folded all the ace jack, ace queen, king queen. So when he actually calls, he has pair plus gut shots, some good top pairs, some pocket pairs that are really connected with the turn. So he's gonna have a really big equity advantage because of that. So this means three things in theory. One, villain should have a lot of donks on the turn, especially on low cards, to punish us for range betting the flop. So let's say button against cutoff, 3-bet pots. As the button, we c-bet 66% pot, and I made the cutoff check raise less often. You should check raise 20% at equilibrium. I made him check raise 10% because that's what people do at low stakes. So we're gonna range bet the flop. Cutoff calls, turn is a 7, and now the cutoff should actually donk. If I give him the possibility to donk, as you can see, the cutoff should actually donk for a small size almost his entire range, because what's going to happen, it donks small, and now we have so many hands that we just have to fold because we don't have anything. We have two overcards and the turn is like the worst of the deck, right? But this is not happening. They will never donk the turn. So what does it mean? It means that we're gonna have to high frequency check the turn because he has so many pair plus gut shots, so many top pairs, and we have a lot of shitty hands that didn't improve. Second point is that we should now use polarized bets on the turn. Yes, our equity has decreased, but we still have the overpair advantage in most spots, which means that you're gonna have to high frequency check, but you have some hands that still want to bet, like jacks plus. So you're gonna have to find some bluffs, but usually you're gonna have to bet really big. That's why after range betting the flop, we mostly use big bets on the turn. The third point is that we should do a lot of check back on the turn. That's what we saw here. The cutoff should actually donk on the turn, but they don't donk, which means that we should high frequency check back the turn. And many of my students ask me like, oh, if I give up everything, I'm gonna get exploited. I'm gonna lose a lot of money. That's why I don't want to c-bet everything on the flop. But you guys need to realize that your EV, the money, comes from the flop. You make a ton of money just by range betting the flop because they're gonna make a huge mistake on the flop, which means that on the turn and rivers, maybe you don't really have to bluff that much because you made the money on the flop. So that's what I said here. Villain already made big mistakes on the flop by not check raising or calling enough, meaning most of our EV came from the flop. Once you get called, he likely has a decent hand, and bluffing into a stronger range might not be the best idea. We will see that there are many spots where you should actually bluff again on the turn because they will still overfold on the turn. But in some spots, if you feel like, oh, my opponent has a really strong range, then just don't bluff. If you feel like he's gonna fold everything on the flop, you made the money on the flop, then just don't bluff on the turns and rivers and you're gonna exploit him. We made our money on the flop, so now we can check back on the turn and realize our equity. Think about it, if we c-bet the flop and never get check raised, it means that we will always be able to see the flop, the turns, and the rivers, because we will be able to check back the turn and fully realize our equity. So in most spots, you're gonna have a really high check back frequency on the turn after range betting the flop, because of the reason I mentioned before. But in practice, the population almost never donks, okay, that's what I said, and still overfolds to second barrels. So you can continue applying pressure with your value hands and selected bluffs. So we will see that in a lot of spots, you should actually bet high frequency the flop and high frequency the turn, and then you're gonna give up everything on the river. So these stats are from Mobius Poker, so definitely check his website and his YouTube channel. And basically, what does it mean? It's the cutoff strategy for the turn after check calling the flop. So as the button, we c-bet the flop, the cutoff check calls. On the turn, it should actually donk really often, but they never donk. So they check, and we bet again, we second barrel, and now we have their strategy. So they check fold the flop. How much do they check fold on the turn? Let's say when we c-bet 1/3 on the flop and second barrel 1/3, we can see that they should check fold only 26%, but they check fold 35, so they clearly overfold when we second barrel. And as you can see, blue means that they are too passive, and you can see that there's so many blues here, which means that when we bet 1/3 on the flop and half on the turn, they still overfold. When we bet 1/3 on the flop, 70% on the turn, they overfold by 12%. When we 1/3 on the flop and 100% pot on the turn, they fold by 5%. So we can see that you should second barrel most of the time on bricks because they just overfold too much. And we can see that the second barrel for 1/3 is actually a good strategy. I usually don't use that because I usually have a polarized strategy on most turns. The 50% is also pretty good. The 100%, for some reason, it's not like the most overfold line, but the 70%. So betting 1/3 on the flop and 3/4 on the turn is a really good strategy because you will get a lot of folds. Now, there is one thing to consider as well, is that their check raising frequency is a bit too high. So it means that they just overfold on the turn, but they will fast play their good hands. So against this line, they should check raise 17, but they check raise 21. So it's 4% more. Here it's 2% more, 2% more again. So they usually fast play their good hands on the turn. What does it mean? It means that on the turn, you should have a polarized strategy. If you have like decent flush draws, maybe it can be a good strategy to actually check back, because if you bet again on the turn, they will check raise their good hands and you will have to fold most likely if they have a big size. So it means that you should have a really polarized strategy, but you will overbluff by a lot. Why? Because they overfold by 12%. 12% is just crazy, right? So this line, the 1/3 c-bet on whatever you want, king 10 deuce, you c-bet 1/3, turns 5, you bet really big again, they are going to overfold by a lot. Same on SI board, same on queen I board, whatever you want, they will be overfolding. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the really big bet on the flop and second barrel on the turn. So I cannot tell you, oh, when we c-bet big on the flop and second barrel on the turn, we make them overfold or not, because I don't have the GTO statistics. But I think I have a pretty decent strategy for the big bets on the flop. So I will explain you what is my strategy when I c-bet big on the flop, what is my strategy on the turn. But for the 1/3 c-bets flops, I think you should most of the time really big bet the turn at a really high frequency, because they will still overfold on the turn. So when we high frequency 1/3 on the flop, you can high frequency big bet on the turn on most bricks. For example, king 10-5 rainbow turn is a deuce. I think you should second barrel really high frequency. And this is pretty close to GTO as well. GTO will second barrel really high frequency. Same for queen 10-5 flush draw and turn is a deuce. Ace-7 deuce rainbow turn is a deuce. On ace-7 deuce, when you second barrel, you should call some pocket pairs, I believe. And I don't think that's going to happen. So you bet big on the turn. He folds everything that is not an ace. And then you give up the river and you make a lot of money. On the cards that complete the flush draws or the straight draws, you will need to have a low to medium frequency second barrel and for a small size. And why is that? Think about it. Let's say the flop is king 10-5 flush draw and the turn completes the flush. You guys will probably have the same amount of flushes, right? But your opponent will have them more often than you. And why is that? It's because you c-bet your entire range on the flop, but your opponent will fold a lot of hands. So even though you probably have the same amount of flushes, he's gonna have them more often. I hope it makes sense. So usually, what does it mean? It means that when the draw completes on the turn, you have to be careful because your overpair advantage decreases a lot, because your opponent will improve very often. And why he will improve very often? Because he folded everything else on the flop. He overfolds on the flop. So when he calls and the flush gets there, he will have flushes a lot of the time. So let's look at it. King 10-5 flush draw, we're gonna c-bet range the flop for a small size. So we have everything, right? We have ace-9 of spades, right? But he doesn't. He will fold ace-9 of spades. So when he calls, is s4, as you can see, ace4 is only the hearts, but we still have the ace4 of spades and the clubs and blah blah blah. He calls, turn is like a deuce. We cannot bet too big and we cannot bet at really high frequency, so it's going to be a 40% second barrel for 50% frequency. Now let's change and pick the deuce of clubs. Now we can increase the sizing and the frequency. As you can see, now we can bet really big and really high frequency. So you need to be careful when the draws complete. I think on a 9, you should still have a lot of checks as well. As you can see, on a 9, you should bet 40%. But on an 8, you're going to bet 66. Why is that? Because the 8 doesn't complete anything. But the 9, it gives your opponent some straight draws, some straights. But the 8 is just a complete brick, right? So it's a huge difference. On the flush, on the 9, you have to bet smaller and low frequency. But on the bricks, you can apply a lot of pressure. Same for Jack 10 deuce, rainbow. We're gonna bet 100% of our range for a small size. He calls, turn is a 9. Our opponent should actually donk. He's never gonna donk. The cutoff checks, and now we should bet 40% and only 40% of the time. Now, there is a 5. He's not gonna donk the cutoff. And now we can bet for a big size for a really high frequency. And you should also high frequency check back on game-changing turns that are better for your opponents. You should exploit the fact that they don't donk enough to realize your equity. I made a mistake, it's your equity, not there. So Jack 10-7 flush draw. Cutoff checks, we bet 40%, okay, why not? Cutoff calls, turn is an 8. As you can expect, the cutoff should actually donk 60% of the time for a really big size. That's not happening. And now, as you can see, we should high frequency check back the turn. Same for ace 4-5 flush draw. The cutoff should actually donk sometime, but I removed the donk. He checks. We should check back at really high frequency. But I think people will overfold and under check raise. So let's use a 1/3 because people use 1/3 on SI board. You bet he should check raise 16%. So let's make him check raise less often. Not gonna make him overfold, just check raise 8% less. So it's 8% instead of 16. Now we check raise is less, our betting frequency will increase 100%. Turn is like a 6 that completes the flush. The cutoff should actually donk. They never donk. And now you have a really high frequency check back. Why is that? Because he should donk, because he has so many flushes and you don't, because you're gonna have so many king queen offsuits and it doesn't. He has so many 6-7, 7-8, 5-6 flushes, pair plus gut shot, like pocket eights, stuff like that. So you just cannot bet your hands and you should high frequency check back. Now when we high frequency 2/3 on the flop, we should high frequency 40% to 2/3 on overcards. They call too many pocket pairs but overfold their overcards. Let's say 9-6 deuce rainbow, we're gonna big bet the flop and high frequency bet on the jack. So 9-6 deuce rainbow cutoff checks, button has a really big bet strategy. We bet the cutoff is supposed to check raise 15, that's not happening. Let's make him check raise 10 instead of 15. I know you cannot see anything, but trust me. And let's make him fold a bit too much as well. Now we will range bet the flop, or close to range at least, like in 80% plus, 90%. We bet equals, turn is a jack. You can see we should second barrel for a big size at decent frequency. Now again, when we second barrel on the turn on the jack, the cutoff is supposed to raise some king queen, even like non-flush draw combos. He's supposed to raise some jack X. I don't even think he will raise that. And he's supposed to call some 6-5 suited 100% of the time. So I think he will definitely overfold and under check raise. So you know what's going to happen. You should increase your second barrel frequency. So on bricks, you should have a medium frequency second barrel. Let's say 9-6 deuce rainbow, but the turn is a deuce. The button bets, the cutoff goes, turn is a deuce. So the cutoff doesn't have any gut shots on this turn, right? But it's still a decent card because it's a brick, it's not an overcard. So as you can see, the cutoff should donk even on a deuce, which is a brick. And as you can see, if the cutoff cannot donk, the button should lower the frequency of the second barrel. And obviously, you should high frequency check back on low cards that improve villain's range. So if they don't donk enough, just take advantage of that and check back at really high frequency on the turn, and you will be able to see the turn and the river for just flop c-bet. So now let's say the turn is a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, a 10. He has so many gut shots, 2 pairs, sets, whatever. Let's take a 5. The cutoff should donk really high frequency, I think. Yep, he should donk range. Now we just range check back. And we check. River is going to be a king. He's going to check again his pocket sevens. And you will be able to bluff or check back, whatever you want. If you have SI, you can try to go to showdown and sometimes you win. But their mistake is on the flop. So you don't really need to apply too much pressure on this kind of turns. But sometimes, you know, you're gonna improve. You're gonna have king queen offsuit and make top pair on the river. So yeah, that was it for this video, guys. You just need to understand that when you high frequency bet the flop, it's because they make a really big mistake. And because of that, your money is made on the flop. On turn and rivers, we saw that you can still exploit them. You can still exploit the fact that they just overfold on the turn. But usually when you have a really big sizing on the flop, then you're going to have a really high frequency check back on the turn. When you use 1/3 on the flop, they will still float enough hands that will overfold on the turn. But on this kind of textures, I will simplify everything. Every time the turn is a jack, queen, king, ace, I will second barrel. And every time the turn is a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I will 100% check back the turn. And it works really well. It's so easy to play. So basically, I don't even have to think about the game anymore because I know the flop bet is good. I know how to play every turn of the deck. And on the river, I will use my intuition and sometimes I will bluff, sometimes I won't. But the money is made on the flop, so don't think about it too much, guys. You know now how to play the turns.